There we go.
Okay.
That's recorded now.
Is that okay?
Okay, well, thank you for joining us,
The phone's okay?
David. And what we'd like for you to do is go ahead and start off with your 5-minute opening. And then, of course, we'll go around the table. So if you'll just introduce yourself and the position you're running for and why you're running, and as I said, take up to 5 minutes, and Pat has a timer right there for you.
Great, thank you.
And then we'll go around the table.
Good, thank you so much. Thank you, appreciate it, that's helpful. Thank you all for the time and the opportunity to visit with you. I sure appreciate it. Of course, I'm David Watts, running for Texas Land Commissioner. Usually what I start with is to explain briefly that my father was a preacher. And that's relevant because we moved around a lot, kind of like kids of Air Force dads and so forth. But we came to Texas after my 2nd grade year, and so we moved to Deer Park, and he preached for a church in Pasadena. And so I kind of grew up around Deer Park, well, in Deer Park, and then after about 5 years we moved up to Alma. And so that's 7 years around Houston growing up. After freshman year of high school, we moved away to Kentucky, finished up high school, college, got a degree in political science. I was always interested in this messy business of how we govern ourselves. And I realized with a degree, you don't learn everything you really need to know. You may not learn that much at all. And so I decided to run for office. And I ran for state rep up there and lost. But it was a fabulous process. Pretty soon kids came along. So we stepped out of that public sort of work and just worked behind the scenes and focused on raising a family. We moved back to Texas in '99. Longview is where we still live. We're a little north of Longview now, but so we've been back 15 years. The kids are now 14, 16, 18, and so it's a lot easier to get re-engaged. My daughter, oldest, is very interested in politics. She's worked for Brian Hughes, and we're good family friends with David Simpson and so forth, and try to support activities there in East Texas. And so we jumped into this race because we thought this race was exceedingly important. Very few people know what it really does. And so we thought it was essential that we not use it simply to launch the career of a 4th generation political dynasty. It's more important than that. It's a very important office. And so we've been putting forth our case very strongly all over Texas. I think this is our 64th conversation with Texans around the state. And so sharing our conservative values for the work. So the work of the office, of course, there are really 4 major points. The first is manage public land, make money for education. The second is veterans benefits, help take care of veterans. The third is history, help preserve history. And then the 4th is the coastline, which is exceedingly important to us as Texans. So in each of those cases, and we'll talk as we go along, but in each of those cases we try to advocate what does it look like if we are truly champions for conservative solutions. It's not enough to be a placeholder. We're not trying to start a career. We're trying to champion conservative values. So what does that look like? We can talk as we go through, of course, but here's an example, I believe. The way we serve veterans. In Texas, we have the Veterans Land Board. We have the Texas Veterans Commission. And all around the state, I've been saying, why in the world do we need 2? And nobody gives me an answer. Fact is, we don't need 2. It's just the way government works. Why be satisfied with 1 agency when you can have 2? That's the way government works.
What was the second? Is there Texas
Veterans Commission, and then the Veterans Land Board.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So the Land Commissioner chairs the one, and the other, the governor appoints 5 people to a board. Those 5 folks appoint an executive director, and it's very insulated. With the Veterans Land Board, you can find Commissioner Patterson and choke him if he's doing a terrible job of veterans. I've said we need the legislature we need a land commissioner who will champion these sort of values. Work with the legislature, convince them, educate them, do some arm twisting if that's what they get them to bring those 2 groups together as one. Keep it under the land commissioner because he's the guy that has to go around and ask for a vote every 4 years. Make it that kind of accessible to the public so that the veteran experience, beginning to end, all things veterans related as far as Texas benefits, one place. Lower cost mortgages, Texas veteran nursing homes, cemeteries, education, navigating the disgrace that is the VA, everything, one, and I think that's where we affirmatively champion what's right. So that's an example, we'll talk about others, of where we want to be on offense. All the state candidates say, you know, Washington's encroaching, we need to push back. Obviously we do. I go a step further. It's not enough to play defense. We have to be on offense. You know, we have to go on offense against bad government and champion conservative solutions. So that's a quick intro. I hope that helps a little bit, and happy to answer anything I can.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go around the table. I don't know if either one of you guys want to start. You want to kick it off there?
Along that line with the veterans, so explain a little bit more in detail how that system works. You're responsible for to serve the veterans. You got a landlord and you know, low cost loans. But as far as the how does that merge with the VA? Give us the correlation.
Yes. So if you'll think about three entities, there's a Veterans Land Board chaired by Commissioner of the General Land Office. There is the Texas Veterans Commission, and then there's the federal VA. And the VA is interesting to me, and I'll add this very quickly, very brief. My grandmother passed away just 2 weeks ago, last Friday morning. Well, 2 Friday mornings ago we got the word. She was a Pearl Harbor nurse, a second lieutenant in the Army, so we're awfully proud of her. So, you know, women in uniform, World War II, she got to Pearl Harbor a couple of months after the bombing. She worked out the rest of the war there at Tripler, then worked in the VA hospital for 30 years in Los Angeles, Long Beach actually, until she retired. So we're kind of proud of that and what that means. But you got the VA, which unfortunately has become a disgrace, I think, how we treat our veterans. The Texas Veterans Commission, in large measure, is to help veterans, Texas veterans, navigate the VA, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. We need an agency to help you navigate that agency.
Wow.
And so that's a commentary on the state of the VA, not Texas. But the Texas Veterans Commission helps with some educational programs for veterans and then navigating VA benefits and getting health care they need and so forth. So that's why I say when you got the Veterans Land Board, which is three big things: lower cost mortgages, you know, and access to land and housing. There's some land we sell, give priority to veterans. Texas Veterans Nursing Homes as they get older, and Texas Veterans Cemeteries. So I come at a lot of this from a business perspective. I lead large businesses implementing large projects, and we look at the end-to-end business process. So if you can imagine, what's the first thing a veteran may come to us and be interested in? You know, it's the full process. And so that's why I say whether it's land, whether it's housing, whether it's mortgage, whether it's health care, nursing home, at the end, dignity for their final resting place, we need to have end-to-end.
So if I'm a vet and I want to apply for buy land or a home, I would come to my state
Veterans,
and then,
yes.
You would help me navigate that.
Yes. Today, of course, you know, you come to us for veterans land. We'd have to say go to the TVC for if you need help with education or health benefits. Okay. If we step back and say, how do we just improve the whole quality? Bringing those together, I would just make a big difference.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I'm a little bit confused on your background a little
Yes.
bit. Mainly just kind of give me, I guess, a summary of like your employment and your income and such.
Absolutely. So about 22 years of business, I consider business leadership experience, and that includes technology consulting, business consulting, and human resources consulting. So I'm still working about 15 hours a week during the rest of the campaign, trying to squeeze that in. My normal routine, I'll drive to DFW, fly to a client, Monday morning, fly to a client. Could be, right now, recently it's been St. Louis, a big 30,000 person hospital chain. Sometimes New York City, sometimes Philadelphia, it's been Europe occasionally Japan, and lead big projects, usually related to human resources. How do we help companies find talent better, manage it, promote people better, give them a career path, give them options, how to grow, in a full life cycle of employee. So that's sort of my specialty. In the early days, 22 years ago, it was, well, it's more than 22 years ago. I graduated '85 from high school, and so even my senior year of high school, it was simple stuff. We were bringing technology into, I remember a big engineering firm that designed the bridge over the Ohio River there in Louisville. Room full of draftsmen, big table. We brought the first technology in. And I just remember that being a watershed.
Technology being IT?
Yeah, well, it literally an old IBM computer, you know,
Okay.
and they were all gathered around using AutoCAD. They were fascinated by it. In there, in 2001, I had a project in New York City. I was unfortunately there for 9/11. And after that, my project was over anyway, and I wasn't ready for a change, especially after 9/11. My dad passed away suddenly. He had passed away suddenly in July of 2001. The church asked me if I would step in because I did a lot of preaching, even though I worked. So I preached full-time for 6 years. Then it was time for a change at the church. I went back to the kind of work I was doing in 2001, found a company that thought I could still offer a lot of value, and so have been doing that since I jumped back in 2008. And worked for a company called Clarkston Consulting. They're based in Durham. The project's just taking me wherever.
And is that technology or is that HR related?
We call it business consulting.
Okay.
But my personal expertise is human resources and technology, where they come together.
Combined, okay.
Yeah, where they come together.
Well, you know, you're right, a lot of people don't know what the land office does. Do you do anything, does land office do anything with administering Hazelwood Act?
I believe the Texas Veterans Commission
They do that.
administers the Hazel as part of the education. This is the program that allows the veterans to get essentially a bachelor's degree. I think it covers the full amount of hours, if I recall correctly. And that's administered through the Texas Veterans Commission, if I understand the process right.
Okay. I know there's a lot of money that's under the land commissioners, and I read about all these funds from the general land offices, the Board of Regents, that they have a ton of money. The SBLE, I don't know if they have money or if they just have approval authority, but the permanent school fund, the available school fund, the university fund, and probably a whole bunch of other funds. Why are there so many funds, and would it be wise to consolidate them somehow? And are they're not invested by the land office? I mean, that's kind of managed by the comptroller, isn't it?
My understanding is, I'll kind of take it at the beginning point, manage land, make money. Royalties, lease payments, and so forth. It flows into the permanent school fund, and there's the permanent university fund, which funds A&M and UT.
That's part of the permanent school fund, or separate little fund?
So those are, there's the PSF and the PUF, they call it. So
Okay.
there's the permanent school fund is for K through 12. Permanent university fund is of course for the 2 universities. Majority goes to the permanent school fund for K through 12. I forget the exact ratio. I want to say it's 90%, 10%. It's some significant split like that. Those are essentially, they call them sovereign wealth funds, and they are permanent in the sense that we're never supposed to touch the principal. So they have, the permanent school fund has an asset value, at least as of a couple of years ago, something like $25 billion. Huge, huge amount. We live off the interest, the royalties. We never decrease the principal. So by statute, I say Congress, the legislature can't touch it. Then if I understand the process correctly, that amount that we can touch, that interest and the royalties that are made by it, become what's called the available school fund. And that gets distributed out to the districts on a average per pupil kind of basis, on a prorated type basis. So it sounds like different funds, but it is different in terms of the K through 12 versus the university. But then if you think of the big 25 billion amount, and then what we essentially have as non-principal that we can use goes to the available, and then it gets distributed out. So that permanent school fund is invested. I believe it's the school land board or the state school land board. The commissioner holds a seat on that to help make sure the investments are managed correctly.
And does the Board of Regents have some interaction with the land office?
I think they're simply the recipients
Oh,
of
they
that
never hand out.
permanent, university fund. So there may be, I've looked more closely into the K through 12 side. There may be a similar structure whereby the land commissioner occupies a seat
Okay.
on sort of an investment or quote spending board, if you will. But I'm most familiar with the K through 12 side.
Well, that's a good explanation, yeah.
But hopefully that helps a little bit. It's kind of an interesting structure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna pass. I like some of that shock look on your face.
I was trying to frame up my question here, and I was hoping you would do yours, but that's fine. On number 3, the question is, what new initiatives should TGLO undertake to ensure the preservation of Texas family farms and ranches? And I know basically your authority extends only to Texas lands.
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, are you familiar with Agenda 21?
Yes.
And are Texas lands that you're responsible for susceptible to being taken over in whole or in part by the feds? And what prevents that from happening if that's not the case? So Agenda 21, and how do we keep the feds out?
Yeah. Yes, familiar with it, concerned about it. Agenda 21 in summary is a UN initiative, its influence. It doesn't present itself necessarily as strong control, but as a persistent sort of ongoing influence to limit, control, development, basically think central planning versus full liberty. Now, we all agree there can be some zoning. Obviously, we live in communities. We want to, if we have a residential neighborhood, we don't want a factory right there. But my point has always been we Texans can figure that out. We don't need UN influence to oversee development or restrain development. The other answer is that I believe, yes, there is that potential corrosive influence for part of the work of the land commissioner from those sort of thoughts, the Agenda 21 sort of development thoughts. I believe an example of that right now, I don't agree with it, but it is the law, and my job is to carry out the law. The GLO has custodianship of the Alamo. I think that's a problem. I'm happy to speak about it more. We should build a framework with the legislature to give custodianship back to the daughters of the Republic of Texas, in my view. But not only did the legislature though, took it from the DRT, the San Antonio is negotiating to have the UN listed as a World Heritage Site. Right? And Commissioner Patterson's on board with that. The GLO's on board with that. They think it's tourism dollars. They see dollars. I strongly disagree. And all around the state I've been talking about it, and it almost causes a near riot. When I talk about it, the reaction, people say, no way, not in Texas. Not. And again, it's not that the UN would take over, but this is a needless invitation to UN influence. We're cracking the door. So the quick example is the UN expects, if this is your site, they expect a buffer zone around it, where you will have some extra oversight of development such that the site is not threatened. That influence is already at work in San Antonio. Happy to elaborate more if you want, but that's an example, and that's what we have to watch for. It's a real threat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Larry?
You mentioned some of the 4 things that the land commissioner is responsible for. The last one was the coastline.
Yes.
Explain that a little bit.
Certainly. So the GLO is essentially the first, think of them as sort of the first responder to the coastline. Many different agencies and groups get involved there, but think of the GLO as sort of the first caretaker, perhaps. You might think of that one. One of the prominent ways the GLO has been involved, has been controversial, is the issue of the property line and erosion. So long story short, if you're out of the beach, you see the sort of the natural berm that gets developed there, and vegetation grows there. And they call that the permanent vegetation line. And essentially Texas claims ownership from that line 10 miles out to sea. And we've had that since we came in as a republic, 10 miles. And the feds tried to take that in the 50s from us. And we beat them at the Supreme Court. So this federal intervention is not new, but we have to always watch it. Now the problem is, Pat here buys a parcel back behind. Private property abuts the vegetation line. Ike comes in, eats 10 feet in, and reshapes that permanent vegetation line. Essentially the letter of law is permanent vegetation line, outward is the states. Commissioner Patterson has been pretty rigid on that. Now, I don't want to see anything like a California. I've lived in California where you have no access to the beaches. Here in Texas, the beaches are ours. But I have been saying around the state, it seems to me there's got to be a way to protect private property rights as well as public. You know, we believe in public beaches, but private property, if we don't have private property rights, we don't have anything. And so there's got to be a way, whether it's to provide an easement to you from the state, to say, yeah, we get it, now this, you know, now the permanent vegetation line's 10 feet in or 20 feet in, but there's got to be a way, whether we give an easement, whether we give a 99-year lease or something that protects you. And or some states try to rebuild those natural, depending on how wide and how broad and how deep. That's an example, and that's been a controversial topic, but that's been an example where the GLO's been involved in that heavily.
Because, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Ken?
All right. There are a lot of issues related to land. It also seems to me that land commissioner is perhaps not the most obvious office to run for.
Yes.
I understand why you run for, you know, state house and everything,
Yes.
but running for land commissioner, statewide office costs lots of money.
Sure.
Why would you choose that office?
Yeah. Well, where I live, now I'm not happy with my state senator, but I'm real happy with my state rep.
Okay.
Now, for those of us who have the kind of occupation where we travel all the time in our normal work, it's just not conducive to running for a House or Senate. Well, it's conducive to running for it, but not serving. So have that 3 months plus potentially multiple extensions. Sadly, while I like the limited legislative session, it does lend itself to lawyers. My brother's a lawyer, yeah, we shouldn't kill all the lawyers, but you know,
Only some of them.
Gotta start somewhere.
keep your list. But but it does lend itself to that, which I think is unfortunate. A guy who is a professional, got a lot of business, it'd be impossible for me to serve in that capacity. Well, so what can I do? And when I saw that my opponent had filed, all the sort of established Republicans scattered. Nobody wanted to run against Bush. And I met one of them yesterday. He said, I was thinking about running for this. Then Bush got in. And I wasn't going to run against Bush. My view was, I got nothing, you know, in Austin. I'm not connected to Austin. I'm not connected to D.C. I'm not, it doesn't worry me if I offend the party or they got no leverage over me. You know, I'm the exact right guy to do this. Mm-hmm. Funding is a challenge, of course, but it is obviously the kind of, if the voters ask me to serve, it's the kind of thing that's obviously full-time and plenty of money to support a family, and you have to live in Austin and all that. So that's essentially why I didn't first look at some smaller step. To me, it's fundamentally wrong to let this important of an office go uncontested in the primary. Just because of the name. And it is just because of the name. Because there are a lot of 37-year-old lawyers who have served in the military. Yeah. So I don't know if that helps a little, but that's
That's great.
What do the commissioner jobs pay?
It is about $140,000 a year for the land
Land
commissioner.
commissioner and ag commissioner and all those.
I think they would be about the same each. I believe land commissioner is $140 a year, if I recall correctly. Or maybe $137, but somewhere around that.
And the land office doesn't have any kind of police authority along the coastline, right? It's just in terms of erosion and that sort of thing.
It's erosion, sort of first responder, oil spills, bacteriological contamination. I think they work with the universities to help monitor for bacteriological levels. One of the things they're involved in now, which I'm opposed to and just came out yesterday or a couple of days ago, closure of Rollover Pass. They want to close it. If you know Rollover Pass, some of you know Rollover Pass. Bolivar Peninsula, little tiny strip of sand. People live there. Ike wiped it out. There's always been there's always been a little narrow section. I mean, narrow from the Gulf backwards toward the intercoastal waterway. And that's why it's called Rollover Pass. Pirates would come, bring their ships, they'd unload the whiskey in barrels, roll it over, because it was low and it would be very high tide, it'd flood that little narrow section. 55, we cut a formal channel, and it's an awesome fishing place.
Oh, I know, there's a lot of people.
You know that? And the GLO wants to close it. And I was just there yesterday. I wanted to be boots on the ground, talk to fishermen, see it myself.
They wanted to block that pass?
They're going to fill it in. They're going to fill it in. And I think that's typical government overreach. The basic argument is it costs money. It pushes sand through there into the intercoastal waterway. Well, of course it does. So it costs some money. Every state park costs some money to maintain. if there's any reasonable role of government, I think most of us agree, parks is a reasonable thing. These are things that can be used and accessed by all. And this place is open for all. They charge $5 now to park just to pay their legal fees because they're fighting the, used to be free to park. You literally pull up your vehicle, step out the back, throw a line.
Step out.
Great fishing. The current washes these cool fish in. But now they charge $5 just to pay their legal fees. They're fighting the GLO. So I saw them yesterday. I'd already decided I hate the notion of closing that. So, but that's an example of what they do on the coast.
Yeah, and I work offshore and they all have, all the companies have major oil spill teams and a whole chain of command. Do you have some liaison with those groups that all companies have?
I don't know the inner working, but I feel confident they wouldn't have all the key names and the key connections with those companies. Yeah.
I'd like to hear more about the Alamo,
Yes.
turning it back over to the,
The daughters.
yes,
Yep,
the
okay.
owners.
Well, the whole reason we have the Alamo, the Daughters of the Republic said this is something precious and we should preserve it. And they were kind of alone on that. You know, it's kind of probably at that point pretty worn down in the middle 1800s and just an interesting relic of history. But they raised the awareness of it. So it always belonged to Texas. It belongs to us. But they had custodianship for about 105 years. About 2 years ago, 3, 4, maybe 2, let's say 2 to 4 years ago, there were big allegations of financial problems in the DRT. And Attorney General Abbott investigated. General Abbott wrote a report, 37 pages. You can download it. I've read through it. I'm not a lawyer, but it's pretty plain English. And you know, it is obviously allegations. It's not evidence. It's allegation. But if the allegations are true, they had some real issues of financial irregularity. But Abbott's clear it's a problem of top leadership. It's not the 7,000 women. But what did we do? The legislature punished the 7,000 women. And we took custodianship away from the Alamo a couple of, maybe it was 2011, and gave it to the General Land Office. Now, they're still engaged. If you go there, you know, you'll still see the Daughters of the Republic. It's essentially operated by them now. They don't have custodianship. They're essentially a vendor. We can contract it out to you next time. Now, my view is that's typical government. You got private citizens trying to do good work. They mess up, which it appears they did, but we're ready to take away privileges and rights when you mess up. I contend if that had been a government agency that messed up, we would still not have the answers. But let it be private citizens, we're ready to jump down your throat. My argument is this: we need to show leadership with the legislature and say, hey folks, here's the issue. We need to build a framework, give custodianship back to the daughters. We can have a framework of checks and balances. That's healthy. And part of the problem may have been there may not have been checks and balances. So that's what we need to do there, I believe. I take the 7,000 women over the bureaucracy any day. So,
Right, no kidding, huh? Pot and kettle.
yeah.
Okay, number 5, what measures will strongly promote to the legislature to improve protection of the private land owners in border regions? And you talked about the border control issues, fence building, whatever it would take. How much of the border, or how much state land constitutes the border?
I think it's quite small. I don't have an exact number for you. There have been tracks such as the Christmas Mountain track way there in that Big Bend area. That was later traded off or essentially moved to the universities, if I recall correctly. So I don't know, you know, I think it's very little actually is sitting on the border. And I think my point of that answer was that I always try to go back to, from a constitutional perspective, what's the General Land Commissioner power to do. And he has no authority, as I see it, on any private property. But if there were state property on that border, then I think we have the ability to at least construct fencing. Beyond that, I don't know that we have any direct constitutional kind of authority. There ought to be a fence, there ought to be full control. Well, let me back up. Whether it's a fence, whatever method it is, the flow has to stop. I don't know if it's a moat with alligators or what it is, the flow's got to stop. Maybe it's more patrolling, maybe it's a literal fence, whatever it is. But I'm not sure I see yet how the land commissioner can quite contribute in a significant way unless it is state property. However, having said that, there are a lot of areas that are not direct constitutional duty. For example, there's nothing directly constitutional about, for the land commissioner about the Second Amendment. But we're all citizens, and we expect a statewide official that will speak out. That'll speak out. We expect a land commissioner who will speak out on important issues, conservative values. So I want a land commissioner to be a champion for the Second Amendment, you know, for private property rights, for stopping the illegal immigration and so forth. Even if it's not strict constitutional, you can always use a bully pulpit. Because, you know, if Patterson calls up and says, I'm going to be in the area, can I stop in and chat with your group? Likely to say yes. You know, come talk to us. And then so you have that opportunity. And I expect somebody that will do that, you know. Even on issues where he can't directly manipulate levers, he can be a voice.
Okay, you've been in business evaluating different companies, and you
Yes.
come in and tell them what they need to do. Basically, I'm sure you've done somewhat of that, as much as you could do before you're there, about the land office. We're learning that some of the entities that the state has are very, very far behind on technology.
Yes.
Bring us up to date on what you know of the technology advance in your new department, and the budget. How many employees do you see raising the budget, or how's it funded, and so forth?
Of course, so the issue of the general land office and technology and sort of size, it is about 627 full-time equivalents, based on a call I made down there to say, hey, what's your head count? So we'll just say 600 people, basically. Typically, government agencies are inefficient and behind the times on technology. I don't know behind the scenes yet. There are internet sites where people kind of anonymously can speak about what it's like to work at a place, a company. And there are references to the General Land Office on at least one of those sites, and someone did mention technologies out of date. The big thing companies today find is that cloud-based solutions are more effective, meaning if somebody uses Gmail, you know, that's a cloud-based solution. I use Google Documents. I can write Word documents in the cloud, you know. And so I don't have to maintain all the IT infrastructure. I just need access to the internet. And I suspect the GLO needs some help with that sort of thing. But my exposure or my experience goes a bit beyond the pure technology, that human resource side, where I want to make sure that, you know, the life of any, whether it's company or agency, is people. You got no people, you got nothing. You got bad people, you got good people, you got something good. So I want to see how we find the right people, really good people, and how we grow them and keep them, how we weed out the ones that are not performing, and how we really build a delivery excellence, we would say in business, where the GLO just delivers brilliant service to its customers, which actually would be more like shareholders, the taxpayers, you know. So that's, you know, technology is a concern, but also just the people, you know.
How about budget? How's it?
I don't know their annual. It is described as the only agency that makes more than it spends, because it sent about $1 billion over a couple of years ago to the permanent school fund. I suspect its annual is kind of in that 300 to 400 to 500 million range. They send over a lot more than they cost, and maybe that's even high for an estimate. But 600 people. With the Veterans Land Board, some people are scattered around, but I think most folks are right there in Austin.
In your interview, you talked about aggressively pursuing the development of lands or to make money.
Yes.
That's your job. How do you contrast that with your need to preserve the land?
Right.
You know, is it worth building amusement parks on the land to generate revenues?
Yeah. So the public land is about 13 million acres. Now, a lot of that acreage count is the offshore land. So when you look at the whole coastline, you say from the permanent vegetation 10 miles out, that's figured into that 13 million acres. So the actual terrestrial land is you know, there's more offshore land.
Okay.
Probably offshore for oil drilling and so forth, but there's plenty of West Texas type land. There's even small tracts in East Texas. There'll be 1,000 acres here or here and there. What I
Now,
believe.
does this also include Big Bend?
Well, Big Bend as of course there's the national park, but that's,
Okay.
is not that. So
Okay.
it also does not include state parks.
Okay.
And so,
It does
not
not?
state parks. Yeah, that falls under the whole governor and the Parks and Wildlife
Oh, okay.
branch. So this is what you think of as essentially totally unallocated, just sort of blank land.
Just out there.
Yeah, and it was never, you know, deeded out. It just
Okay.
always belonged to the state.
But it does include, that 10 miles out, does that include inland state water leases to oil and gas companies?
Yeah, the bays and estuaries.
That's pretty
Yes,
significant,
yes,
yeah.
includes that, so it's a lot
Probably
of.
the biggest profit generator there.
Yes, I
huh?
think so,
And
yeah, I think so, and
besides the RR.
so it is a, even though 13 million acres sounds like a lot is offshore. Even if 13 million was all onshore, it's a tiny amount compared to all of Texas. Texas is unique of the western states because there's not much public land actually, unlike in Nevada, Arizona, Utah. And it's unique in that the feds don't have much. They got Fort Hood and they got a little BLM land up at the National Healing Reserve, Amarillo. So, given that it's a tiny amount, my belief is your job is maximize revenue, not with any politically correct agenda or with, you know, so for example, some would say, well, we want to see you push wind more. My answer is, I want an inventory of every track we have, and an assessment, and I'm sure they have it, but at least make sure it's refreshed. What's the productive potential? Some land's good for oil and gas, some is good for wind. And whichever, and it may be dual use, but whichever generates the most revenue, that's what we ought to try to use. Not according to any political agenda, but just according to the agenda to make money.
Right.
Including development,
By development, would you mean?
developers, communities, and that sort of thing.
That would be a change of use. So all the things we can lease for would just be revenue developments of oil and gas. In other words, you couldn't take a,
Subsurface.
Naturally.
yeah, you couldn't take a track and sell it to well, let me back up. You couldn't just develop, you know, housing on it, for example. The administrator, or the land commissioner, has authority to buy and sell land and do some trades. So if you had a big tract here that just had no productive value for surface mining, oil and gas, wind or solar or anything, and over here is private land, and these folks really would love to connect the two, you know, and maybe there's a tract over here that's better. You can do some buying and selling and trading. But generally speaking, this is our land, this is Texas. It's not the authority to put a subdivision on it or develop commercial kind of activity like that, but it's natural resources. Kind of like the Department of Interior, except for Texas. Yeah.
So I guess that would be the same as change of use if you wanted, if you found oil under the Alamo.
Yeah, and of course, actually, the Alamo is. Yeah, it's interesting. The chapel is actually sort of now controlled by the GLO. The plaza is San Antonio, so even that's not really public land. Per se, it's San Antonio city land, but each place has to be used in a way that maximizes.
Okay.
What I'm opposed to is somebody saying, "Here's 10,000 acres, perfect for oil and gas. You know, there's great shale, but we need to push a solar agenda."
Right.
Not my plan.
Right.
I mean, if solar made more money than oil and gas, great.
Right.
You know,
Yep.
but whatever makes more money, I ran over it.
Yeah, that's okay.
You think Parks and Wildlife should be under the GLO?
That's an interesting question. I've not been asked that. I guess my reaction would be probably not. It's a little different focus.
Yeah.
Parks and Wildlife is dealing not only with the parks, but also the wildlife aspect and species and more of the biological aspect. A little different.
Land Office is not involved even with fish in some of those places where there's water issues?
I mean, if it's public, like bays and estuaries and the health of it, then I think you'd have multiple agencies involved. The GLO would probably have sort of the legal authority or the management. I would imagine Parks and Wildlife would, they would conduct the studies of the health of the bay. Like with the Rollover Pass issue, there have been studies of the salinity levels.
Yeah.
Actually, the GLO did those or hired those to be done. So I suspect there's a lot of overlapping authorities, from a biological perspective, maybe Parks and Wildlife. From a species management perspective, probably Parks and Wildlife too. But remember, from a legal caretaker, it's probably more the GLO. I think of the GLO almost like they're the landlord.
You'd mentioned that the GLO had passed maybe $1 billion to the school fund.
Yes.
Would that go to the permanent school fund to increase that, or would it go as earnings to the available school fund?
That was the available school fund, yeah, so that was.
They would get that as income to use.
Yeah, that was, it was around $1 billion, I think that was the 2010, 2011 time period, and they passed over about $1 billion. Now, that's just a fraction of what,
And that was for earnings that year, or is that an accumulation of some sort?
I believe that was an earning for the year. Yeah, the previous year was, there was a year, let's say it was 2009 or 10 because of the big market crash, where it's very small, like maybe 150 million. And then I believe the legislature passed a law allowing the GLO to do a little catch up, like if the next year is extra good. Maybe it would have only been 600 million, but then a little catch up. I suspect it averages out around $1 billion a year in reasonable years. Granted, just a fraction of what the state spends on education, but
Being here, being there.
it adds up, yeah. Real money.
Yeah, real money.
I'll go ahead and pass to you.
What's that?
Go ahead and pass to you.
Oh, okay. You touched on desalinization a little bit, and and the question was back to number 6, describe the proper role of the land office in dealing with water issues, and list at least 2 specific initiatives you recommend. And one of those was continuing research and development with desal technologies. Explain that, if you could, and go in a little bit more detail. Is that tax dollars or incentives, or what do you have in mind there?
Presently, the General Land Office has already done some experimentation with desalinization technologies. I believe they did in conjunction with one of the universities. So desal is a pretty proven technology. El Paso is one of the biggest users in the world for their drinking water because it's so dry. They have a large desal plant. I think, unfortunately, it's named after K. Bailey Hutchinson. But anyway, it is a proven technology. What the GLO is trying to do is, on the smaller tracts, can it be reasonably efficient? Pump up there's the freshwater aquifer, below it is brackish water. Pump up that brackish water, desalinate it. Can it be used for irrigation? If it can be, does that improve the marketability of the land? If you've been to Vegas or California, you know the difference between $1 million acre land and $100 acres water. So can it be used for that, to raise the productive value? Can it be used for cattle and so forth? Or, as in El Paso's case, drinking water? I think what we can do is encourage companies to lease that land. So let's suppose in West Texas there's a tract where there is brackish water, good supply, billions of gallons below. Can we encourage a company to lease that land? Build a desal plant, pump it up, then sell it on the open market. I think we kind of get 2 birds with one stone. We get more economic activity, jobs, buildings, and we get water on the market. Maybe, I've heard the El Paso water doesn't taste that great. Maybe it's not great for drinking, but for crops, for cattle, might be just what we need. By the way, quick commentary. What we did in the old days, when we started this republic in this state, we said we need a land commissioner, we need an ag commissioner, railroad commissioner. If we had that mentality today, I think there would be a statewide elected official, the water commissioner. I don't like this water board thing, this Prop 6. I don't know who those guys are. I don't know who they pay off to get on or who they're friends with to get on that board. But can you imagine a statewide water commissioner? You elect, he runs, he or she. That to me is the style we want.
Amen to that.
So,
Well, let me just commentary, and I'll kick it over to Larry. You don't have to go all the way to West Texas to know that there's water issues. All you have to do is see the road that you just drove down to get here. Called research. They're building a $250 million pipeline. Just the pipeline costs that they're bringing water from Lake Conroe and other parts, who knows where, down to spread out amongst the woodlands, and then they got a $250 million plant, pumping station, clarification system to do that, and they're desaling nothing. and we got plenty of water below us to desal, and they used El Paso's numbers to justify not going that route.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Tends to be 15, maybe at least 15% more expensive. The energy cost adds about a 15% premium at least. You mentioned in there, it may be controversial, but I'm in the position of saying it's okay. I think if there's ever a case where nuclear power makes sense, it's out in West Texas somewhere, about 100 miles from nearest town, next to a desal plant. You know, that power to run the desal, which requires electricity, to me, makes great sense. I'm sure people will tell me, you know.
or natural gas.
Or
which
natural
we got
gas.
plenty
That's
of
true,
here.
burn the natural gas, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, Larry?
On number 18, the question was, please comment on the TGLO's disaster relief response to the wildfires of 2011-2012, and the Hurricane Ike in 2008. And I'd like for you to go over that for
Sure,
us.
flush that out a bit. So, I did a little research on that. Federal government gave dollars, as they often do. Governor says, Commissioner Patterson, we want you to administer, we want the GLO to essentially administer those. In the case of Ike, the community rebuilding kind of dollars to help. I'm very careful about federal dollars, but let's, for the moment, say if there's a case where federal dollars make sense is when, you know, you see Bolivar Peninsula and all the houses are scoured off. Right? That's one, I think, reasonable role of government, true disaster relief, right? What concerned me, though, was, from everything I can see,